You are watching Channel Africa Conversations.
Dynamics have been changing. There are much more younger people now, and they are not able to understand just why there's not been change generally. Other than that, the people have been very, very unhappy with the government of President Masisi. There was a lot of corruption, and it got worse towards the end of his presidency when the economy basically collapsed.
Hello and welcome to Channel Africa Conversations. I'm Peter Ndoro. After nearly 60 years in power, there's a change of guard in Botswana. Citizens overwhelmingly voted to remove the long-time governing party in the country, with the new president coming from the opposition benches. Are the winds of change sweeping across Africa, and in particular the SADC region? We find out on Channel Africa Conversations. In a historic election upset, Botswana's long-time standing ruling party, the Botswana Democratic Party, BDP, was unseated after 58 years in power. Duma Boko, the opposition candidate, emerged as the winner over incumbent President Masisi, marking a significant political shift for the nation. Since gaining independence from Britain, the BDP has maintained a stronghold on Botswana's government, making this victory a defining moment for democracy in the country. So what does this new leadership mean for the country? What are the broader implications of the political transition for the region and even perhaps the continent? So what's the situation inside the country now, and what are the citizens expecting from their president? I spoke to a journalist from the capital, Gaborone. Spencer Mogapi, former editor of the Botswana Telegraph. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on Channel Africa Conversations.
Thank you very much for having me, Peter.
Spencer, take us through the mood and the feeling in Botswana after the election results. How are people feeling now?
There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of exuberance. This is the first time this country is going through this particular phase since independence in 1966. The first elections were in 1965, and the Botswana Democratic Party has won every election since then, and they were in power for 58 years. So you can imagine what that means. Many people, in fact, the country itself, this is the first time it's experiencing a change of power from one party to the other. And we've always known only the Botswana Democratic Party. It is now in opposition as we speak, as part of the opposition. And we have in place the umbrella for democratic change, which is actually a battery of political parties that came together under one leader, and they've won elections. They've been trying this as a group since 2011 in different formations. And now they are in government as I'm speaking to you, Peter.
So what is it that Botswana voted for? Why the need for change?
A lot of things. I mean, the population dynamics have been changing. There are much more younger people now, and they are not able to understand just why there's not been change generally. Other than that, the people have been very, very unhappy with the government of President Masisi. There was a lot of corruption, and it got worse towards the end of his presidency when the economy basically collapsed. Botswana depends a lot on diamonds, and diamond sales have basically plunged. And that caused a lot of fear among Botswana because they are used to stability when it comes to the economy. And President Masisi could not provide that. It is this fear, this uncertainty, especially among the young people, that really fast-tracked the mood for change. And people believe that they could at least now give somebody else a chance.
The BDP has been in power, as you said, since the beginning, 60 years almost. So was this a vote against the BDP or against President Masisi?
A combination of the two, actually. The opposition was growing in popularity, But there was also a lot of resentment, public resentment against Masisi specifically as the leader, and also against his party. You can imagine being in power for 58 years. Everything that went bad for the country could easily be traced to the BDP. And then came this leader almost 6 years ago, Masisi, and people could really see that the country had totally lost direction. They questioned the judiciary, they questioned the public service, and they questioned every other public decision made. But more importantly, there were also issues regarding international relations. People asked themselves, why Botswana seemed to be at loggerheads with South Africa in particular, the country that they really count on for a lot of things. And they didn't get clear answers from government. It was clear from the relations that things were bad and people did not like it. That's one thing that also should be put in the bag, in the mix, ultimately, when people ask themselves, why did the people feel there had to be a change of government now?
Did the spat with Ian Khama also play a part? For some of us from the outside looking in, we don't quite know the internal dynamics, but it did come as a surprise that a former head of state picks you as the person to take over, and then this long-running battle that took place that forced Ian Khama into exile. Did that play a role in public sentiment, perhaps?
It played a very big role. Look, President Khama, he's not just a former president. He's also a very key figure in the history of this country, being the son of the first president, the founding president. Other than that, he's a very senior royal of one of the biggest tribes, because Botswana is still an African country. Tribes mean a lot to the people here. And his people did not like the way they felt Masisi was treating him. And they wanted Masisi out so that President Khama himself could come back from exile. Because when he spent almost 3 years in South Africa, he was making it clear to his people that the only reason why he didn't want to come back, he feared for his life because this government did not like him. And that rubbed the people the wrong way. Look, in 2019, when there were elections here, people were with Masisi because they felt very strongly that Khama was trying to disrupt Masisi's rule. And they begged Masisi, but they felt later on that Masisi had overreached by way of hounding Khama out of the country. In that instance, then they begged Khama and said the only way to bring Khama back was to get rid of Masisi. So to answer you in a short way, I would say yes, Khama played a very, very big role. He arrived here back from South Africa almost a month ago, and immediately he came, he started campaigning for his own party, and the dynamics changed. There was a lot of excitement. The people started believing all of a sudden that there could be change that favored the opposition. So yes, Khama played a very big role, yes.
What about neighboring states? We read reports, the opposition actually said that, look, Zimbabwe is involving itself in this election. We saw a senior ZANU-PF official at a gathering of the BDP praising and helping promote the BDP. Did that relationship with Zimbabwe also play a role? And what do we know about any possible involvement?
What we know is from, there was a lot of suspicion that President Masisi had become very, very close to President Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe. And the friendship, which was public in every way, Mnangagwa was almost every month here in Botswana, or if he's not here, Masisi would fly to Zimbabwe. And the opposition were always asking, why this proximity? Because it's way beyond official links, it's way beyond SADC relations. And then Masisi, to make matters worse, he made a pronouncement that going forward, he wanted to introduce a policy where Zimbabweans would just come into Botswana with no requirement for passports, just using identity card. And that was the turning point. The opposition here went further to say there was a lot of maneuvering behind the scenes by the Zimbabwean intelligence services to help prop up Masisi. We don't have evidence, but because of the proximity that always existed between Masisi and Mnangagwa, people readily believed that and bought into it, and they said we have really needed as a country to preserve our sovereignty against meddling by the Zimbabweans. So the people were ready to buy into that narrative. Yes, it played a big role, even though there was ultimately no evidence of it.
Soon after his victory, the new president, President Boko, said to the journalists and to the media that you will be freer. You will be allowed to criticize, report as you want. What does that tell us about the culture that you were living under previous to this new administration? What's it been like being a journalist?
Let me say this, start answering by saying Masisi also arrived into the scene saying the same thing. But when it came to real practice on the ground, he immediately changed. He stopped being accountable and being very, very, I would say, combative against the media. The intelligence meddled a lot in the operations of the newsrooms. There were fears that they were even pulling strings behind the scenes by way of influencing some journalists. And that kind of put a wedge between the media and the public, because the public lost a lot of trust on the media because they felt that Masisi and his intelligence services were actually running the newsrooms. I hope that under Boko, he is saying the same thing that Masisi said, and it means, I hope he means what he's saying. Look, number one, Boko is a human rights lawyer. Throughout his career, he has been fighting not only for human rights, but also for freedom of the press, freedom of the media. He has been calling for free expression and the like. So I hope he really means what he's saying. And I have a lot of hope. But things can change. So the important thing for the media, and I've been saying it to many journalists over the last 2 weeks, that they really have to hold Boko accountable, his government. We need also a strong opposition. I'm happy to tell you also that in Parliament, we have a very formidable opposition in the form of Botswana Congress Party. So there's not going to be lack of holding this government accountable, especially in Parliament. The media itself is still very early days. They've become used to this culture of rendering themselves subservient to government. They have to change, especially because they are getting it from the president himself saying, do your job, which is holding those in power accountable.
He also had the same message for the public. And he said, look, I want you to criticize. I want you to speak your minds and hold us accountable. Does that mean that the public in the past have found it difficult to express themselves? And if so, how and why?
It had people like the media, they had also kind of fallen into line under Masisi. Number one, we have a very strong government in Botswana. They are the ones issuing out contracts. They are the ones issuing out tenders. And people, not just in business, people even as individuals, for them to survive, they felt that they had to align themselves with government. That kind of grew. It was always there under Khama, but it kind of reached a tipping point now under Masisi, because if you were critical of him, you could be pretty much sure that you were going to be hounded by his people. You were going to be criticized for lack of patriotism. You were going to be criticized for hating Masisi. I know it because I was one of the people who felt it myself, because I was very critical of Masisi, feeling that he had kind of soiled the public institutions, including the judiciary. So Boko is promising the opposite way now. We hope that he means it again. When he's saying, say what is in your mind, and I will not be going after you. I think Botswana should seize that opportunity, because that's the only thing to ascertain the future of this country going forward.
Going forward, sometimes, and I've seen this often, where you have a common enemy, a coalition will work together and they'll move forward together. Once that enemy has been dealt with, then you start to see perhaps we weren't always on the same page about certain things. Do you think this coalition, the UDC, can hold going forward? Are they sufficiently united in their views and how they want to move forward? Or are there people perhaps who are eyeing the prize and they said, for now, I'll be part of this, but I actually had my own presidential ambitions, for example?
I think that's a very, very good point you are raising. It actually crossed my mind in the last few days. I'll tell you, the jury is still out on that. It will all ultimately depend on Boko himself. If he undermines his other partner, especially his vice president, who he has worked with before in the opposition, and then they later went different ways because the current vice president was unhappy with the way Boko was running the coalition. It might happen again. But Boko is now in power. If you look at the personalities between Boko and his deputy, they are totally different. The number two is not going to want to, for example, take away the reins from Boko. He's a very sober kind guy, but he's a very principled person when it comes to governance. So if he feels that the president himself is not living up to what had been promised in opposition, that is when we will see serious problems, because he might want to leave, or he will immediately go to the public and tell them that this is what we are seeing inside the government and I will not tolerate it. He's a very, very steadfast chap, and he has been given this position and people are counting on him. I think that is another reason why people had some faith in this particular coalition, is exactly because of the number two guy, because people knew his dedication to rule of law and to governance.
So what about international relations? This relationship with Zimbabwe now, will the dynamic change? We also see what's happening in Botswana. I remember Ian Khama often was not afraid to have a firm hand with issues regarding Zimbabwe. Will this president be bold enough to say what needs to be said in difficult countries, difficult circumstances?
Yes, especially when you take a situation as it's now playing out in Mozambique. President Boko will not hesitate to be on the side of ordinary people, on the side of opposition especially. There was always this alliance that was building. It included Boko's own party here. I think it included the opposition in Mozambique, also in Namibia, also in South Africa, and the government today in Zambia. So what I see as his priority is really to reset relations between Botswana and South Africa. That, I think, will happen. It will start to happen in the next few weeks. But yes, you can count on Boko to be on the right side when it comes to speaking out, especially on the human rights side, on the side of the people, ordinary people, because that is his nature. He has been like that while an ordinary lawyer, but also when in politics. So you can expect that, but not to the extent that Khama did, because I think Khama went overboard into almost interfering, I would say, in other countries' internal politics. But Boko would not do that, but he will speak out and try to temper excesses when they are done by other colleagues in the SADC region.
All right, so high expectations, I guess, that the people have. What does he need to do straight away to get people on side and to give him the time that he needs?
I think the first thing that he needs to do, Peter, I'll tell you, the expectations are too high, but the economy is on its knees. He needs to dial down the expectations, try to temper and recalibrate that we will do our best, but the economy first has to come up. If the diamond sales pick up, then I can pretty much say yes, he will deliver on his promises. But it is up to him and the partner who are DBS to see to it that diamond sales kickstart again. If that doesn't happen, I'm sorry to say his people will be badly disappointed and we might be headed for a fallout between Boko and his supporters.
Spencer Mogapi, former editor of the Botswana Telegraph. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us on Channel Africa Conversations. We continue to unpack the remarkable story of the 2024 Botswana elections that has seen a tectonic shift in the politics of the country and perhaps set the nation on a new trajectory. But what are the implications of a long-term governing party such as the Botswana Democratic Party losing its grip on power after nearly 6 decades? Opposition politics has been difficult at best in the region, as witnessed in countries such as Zimbabwe and more recently in Mozambique. To make sense of this, I spoke to political analyst and academic from the University of South Africa, Professor Lesiba Teffo. Professor Teffo, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to Channel Africa Conversations.
Good day and greetings to the viewers and listeners.
Prof, was the Botswana election result a surprise?
Certainly not. I'll tell you why I say so, because I've had some working relationship with the IEC in Botswana, with the SADC IEC, whose headquarters in Botswana. So I had the privilege and the honor of visiting Botswana on several occasions. I have seen as a small emerging country and rising, the skyscrapers, all other things that happened in the past 20 years were extremely encouraging. And as one involved in democracy and governance, there is a lot of research that one can go through that says it is and it was a model democracy on the entire continent. There is ample research to that effect. But at the same time, I have seen seeds, right, of degeneration being sown, especially in the last 5 years. Peter knows fairly well what is called sins of incumbency that brought down many liberation movements. And sadly, even those who have learned prior to assuming the mantle of power, they could not resist the temptation of falling in the same traps, including the ruling party in South Africa. It ought not to have been doing the things it's doing, because it was the last to be set free. It ought to have learned from up north's experiences and sister liberation movement. One, nepotism, cronyism, corruption, tenderpreneurship, right? Mediocrity. That's what the past 5 years in Botswana became endemic. There are some reports that suggest that the outgoing president or the former president is much richer than he was when he walked in office.
I want to talk a little bit about the region, perhaps Southern Africa. And I wonder, is it a coincidence that opposition parties in Botswana were complaining about ZANU-PF involving themselves in the politics of Botswana? Again, a long-term ruling party. And also in Mozambique, we're hearing the same, and that there's tensions on the border there and inside the country where Zimbabweans are being targeted because it's been felt that, again, ZANU-PF has involved itself in that election there. And some might even say that South Africa and the ANC perhaps let a lot of things go in Zimbabwe that were allowed to escalate to the situation where a whole election was declared not free and fair by SADC.
Yeah, look, this unholy alliance of the so-called former liberation heroes and heroines who have almost signed with blood that will never betray or call each other out. It's really a shame that even in the face of Mugabe's failure and brutal and efficient destruction of his country, that the ANC could not bring itself to say here and no further. And I am reminded with pain what Ian Khama tried, what Levi Mwanawasa tried, trying to encourage and to coax SADC to say, can you get this old man to go? He has done enough for his people, but he's beginning to undo and to dismantle his legacy. The likes of Thabo Mbeki, and I know for a fact that he will never be forgiven by the Zimbabweans, never ever, because when Mwengen Changarai won the election, it was him the architect of so-called government of national unity, right? That ultimately led to almost to the total collapse And I think in retrospect, that led to the demise of ZANU-PF and the removal of the unholy, unceremonious removal of Robert Mugabe. If Mugabe conceded defeat, by the way, he did, but he consulted with Mbeki, Obasanjo, and they encouraged him not to step down. They said he would provide whatever assistance. Now, that said, Mugabe also threatened Ian Khama when he said it's time to go. And the Botswanas advised him that, you know, he might sow the seeds of destruction. It's very easy in Africa. Just get 10, 20 people, arm them, then they become rebel. And that's what brought down, that retarded the development of Angola with Savimbi. And then you have got Alfonso Dhlakama, retarded the development of, and who were finding these fellows in Mozambique, right? So, and somehow ZANU-PF has always been in the center. And the ANC must be careful not to inherit or to be seen to be moving in that direction, especially now the end seems to be nigh.
So what are the lessons that can be learned about what's played out in Botswana for countries like maybe Mozambique, where people are still demonstrating now, saying that this election was stolen? Zimbabwe has not been brought to account for its own last election. And then there are questions about what might happen in Namibia. What lessons can be learned about the forces of opposition parties? I mentioned the winds of change at the introduction to this program, and I wonder if there isn't a general wind of change, a demand for democracy across the continent.
No, the winds of change, well, Macmillan said that in the early 60s. And I heard some Africans say the African giant is rising. And this giant has been rising for years. I don't see it getting up. It's not, if anything, the situation is getting worse. The African giant is not rising. It's almost there, right? But that said, there are lessons to learn. And Masisi, I think he has immortalized himself in a sense by conceding defeat while the counting was still on. And I'm not surprised. I've come to expect that from Botswana. They really respect their country, their institutions, and they really want to build. And they're so nationalistic, and they have a sense that they really can set the tone and become a model, because research attests to that. They may be a small country, but they've got strong institutions and they respect those institutions. And what Masisi did, I think, is fairly good. I wish, when you mentioned Namibia, you see, Namibia also, remember, it's almost 40 years independence, and you have never had the ructions that you have picked up in many countries. They've always been, there will be contestation, but they also respect their institution. And they're building their economy reasonably well. They're doing fairly well. Mozambique is, for me, is on the rise, but it is not given enough space to rise. And unfortunately, well, yeah, I don't know how to put it, but the demise of Alfonso Dhlakama seemed to have expedited the development process. I'm talking about what I've seen and observed. I'm a regular in that part of the world. I can talk in comparative degrees, in as much as I can talk about Zimbabwe in comparative degrees. I have witnessed its decline. I've not read about it. I can't count how many times I've been to Zimbabwe, to the university and to other, even social activities, right? So I have seen the demise and the collapse of the countries because of failure to appreciate that you can only serve for so long and step aside. Democracy is strengthened by competition and competitiveness. And Botswana are doing that. And then, it's a pity, Peter, that the seat-tight presidents in Africa are the ones who are messing up the continent.
So what next for the BDP? Is this an opportunity for reform? The ANC has lost its majority. Is this an opportunity for the ANC in South Africa to reform? And then neighboring countries, could they save themselves a lot of pain with reform as well?
Yeah, let's conclude on BDP in Botswana. I'm told the president, former president, has resigned or will be resigning from the party, and it's unfortunate. He might say, "I'm taking political responsibility for the failure of the party. Let other people come in," but there will always be this thing bugging him, that he amassed a lot of wealth. Now he's going to spend it together with his cronies. There is a strong sense that there was corruption. Corruption was rampant under him. There is some evidence to that effect. You picked up on the ground. You picked up on in research papers and articles in there is that sense, right? Yes, let them go back and regroup. They can still come back. That is fine. But lessons for South Africa, Peter. If I were the ANC, I would be worried. I would be worried by what happened in Botswana. I would be worried by what is happening in Mozambique. And I'm going to say this, Peter, with all the risk that goes with it. Watch out, Peter. Watch out. Watch out for MK. I don't see Jacob Zuma going back as a president, but he will go back. He will go back, installing a new government if the ANC is not careful. And I see they are doing all the wrong things right now. Definitely doing all the wrong things, right, to enable the MK. It may not be in the next election, but definitely MK is on the march. And they are certainly emboldened by the fact that, sorry, if Donald Trump can make it, so can we, right? It may not be in the person of Donald Trump, but Zuma, one way or another, if they don't manage themselves well, he will be back in power. He will be back calling the shots. Well, maybe he might be tempted as well to say, I can walk in for 6 months and step down. Yes. You know, Peter, there is big brother there called Paul Biya. How old is he and for how long has he been in office?
Yes.
But I don't think Jacob Zuma will go that route.
Professor Lesiba Teffo, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for joining us on Channel Africa Conversations. And that's Channel Africa Conversations. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Please don't forget to connect with us on our social media platforms that are on your screen now. And you can start here on this channel by pressing the like and subscribe buttons. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and the kind of conversations that you want to hear from us. From me and the team, until the next time, goodbye.